Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this webinar around generative AI and data engineering, how data engineering is transforming generative AI. So before we get into details, let me just quickly introduce myself and our panelist. My name is Avinash, co-founder CTO at Nexla. Nexla brings about automation and collaboration into the data engineering process so that the data can be ready to use for AI analytics and operations. Uh, we pride ourselves for converging data integration patterns by inventing this concept of virtual data products. And these virtual data products are no code, low code, can be used across use cases around operations, analytics, and of course, AI. I am joined here by a very distinguished elite panel. It's my pleasure to welcome Zan, Ben, and Rahul. Before we get into the nitty-gritties of GenAI, data engineering, we'll quickly give them 30 seconds to introduce themselves. Zan, why don't you go first?
Hi, everyone. My name is Zun Wang. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Bloomreach. Bloomreach is a provider of e-commerce technology, and we provide search recommendations as well as email marketing solutions for a lot of big enterprises like CVS.com, Staples, and so forth. Previous to Bloomreach, I was at Medallia, and previous to that, I was at NVIDIA.
Thanks, Zan. Welcome. Thanks for doing this. Rahul?
Hello, everybody. Rahul, a lead data group at TripAdvisor. In this capacity, I oversee all aspects of data functions, which is data engineering, data platforms, analytics, data science, and AI machine learning groups. Hopefully, you've all heard of TripAdvisor and use it in some capacity. We'll talk more about that. But I've been in data field for long time. Prior to this, I was at LinkedIn, leading data engineering, AI, data science teams to drive monetization, and been in the tech space for a long time.
Welcome, Rahul. Thanks for joining. Last but not the least, Ben.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for inviting me on. But my name is Ben Rogojan. Some people know me as the Seattle data guy, but my focus is helping companies set up their end-to-end data infrastructure. So I do a lot of consulting with companies that range from startups to large enterprises, and sometimes that means helping people migrate to the cloud. Sometimes it means picking new solutions and helping them kind of figure out what will be the most effective kind of going forward. Prior to doing that, I worked at Facebook and a few startups. So thanks so much for having me here.
Thanks, Ben, for joining us. This is great to have all of you here. Before we get into the session, quick ground rules. We'll talk about GenAI. We'll talk about the promises, the challenges, the path forward for the first 45 minutes or so. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A panel that you see, and we'll try to answer them maybe during or after at the end of the session. We have a 15-minute Q&A at the very end. We also have a couple of audience polls during the webinar, and we look forward to your participation there. So without any further ado, let's get deep in GenAI. All of us need to be living under the rock if we don't hear GenAI a few times a day nowadays. So what I want to really start with, Rahul, some of us swear by TripAdvisor before planning a trip, booking a hotel. You are sitting upon this treasure trove of data. Tell us, what are you doing with GenAI applications, the applications you are building, things that you are planning to do?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, especially if you look at your LinkedIn feed these days, again, all of us, it's all at least for mine, it's filled with all GenAI, all the good stuff. So I think at TripAdvisor, just for context, if just to give us some sense on the data we have, at TripAdvisor, we have about 400 million plus monthly active users. So as you can imagine, that's a huge set of users coming in, at least on a monthly, if not more, basis, interacting with the sites and products. We have about billion plus reviews. And then there's a ton of content coming up from those reviews. And then we have a lot of businesses, hotels, trip operators, small business owners, restaurants, all live and active on the TripAdvisor platform. So as you can imagine, there's a pretty rich wealth of data that's available. And when you think about that, and when you think about what can be now possible with large language models, where we have defined our GenAI strategy is in three pillars. So first and foremost is what we can do with our product features that is in service of our travelers, our customers, and partners. So you might have seen, at least, or I'm hoping some of you have seen, what we launched a trip planning application using GenAI. So this is where we understand your profile, your preferences, and then really help you create a really day-by-day itinerary with places to stay, places to visit, restaurants, like everything included in that part of the itinerary. It's much richer information than what you would see otherwise. So trip planning is a big focus for us. And like I was alluding earlier, content is a big focus, or we have huge content. So what we're doing is launching content summarization, aggregation that can help users and travelers make a decision. So if you're making a trip to Napa, what are the restaurants? What are the hotels? What are the specific details in that which could be relevant for you? So all that information is available to you. So a lot of work in this first bucket of products and features. Second area we're looking at with GenAI is around productivity improvements. This is also, again, hopefully you all are seeing like how much GenAI can be a big tool, a big enabler of productivity, efficiency, and effectiveness. When it comes to engineers to write code, we are also extending that to customer service, to sales, marketing, finance, accounting, HR, even analytics use cases. So there's a whole big body of work around productivity improvements. And lastly, we are also thinking about how we can take our data, our insights, and externalize them with partnerships so that we can push this information into search engines, into external platforms, so that users can be benefited by that. So that's our focus on GenAI. Again, as you can imagine, there's a lot going on, and we're pretty excited about that.
I'm super excited. Probably in a few months, a year, I can go on TripAdvisor and say I have a 7-day trip to London. These are my dietary restrictions. This is what my 8-year-old loves. This is what my 4-year-old loves. And then I have an itinerary which I can go use.
Absolutely. You can do it today. Most of it you can do today, and you'll be even getting to very specific in a month or so. So
that's awesome. Thanks, Rahul, for sharing. Zan, what are we seeing in the conversational commerce space? I know Bloomreach is pretty big there.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say big fan of TripAdvisor, Rahul. I use it all the time for my vacation needs. Now, as I mentioned earlier, what we do at Bloomreach is really to provide e-commerce technology to help people find stuff. You know, whenever you go to cbs.com and you type something into the search box, that's Bloomreach working. Now, as you can imagine, we already leverage a lot of AI technologies to make that work. And that aligns very naturally to NLP and understanding human language. Now, what this generation of artificial intelligence has unlocked for us is the ability to better understand human concepts through language, and even more now through images and using multimodal models, right? So we are introducing that technology to enhance some very classic capabilities of understanding search queries in terms of semantic understanding, in terms of tagging of images and changing those into attributes so we can match that better. So that's one area where it will just make search and finding things a lot better. But in the other area, as you mentioned, Avinash, we're also seeing generative AI and understanding language as a new unlock in the way that humans interface with technology in general. Over the last 2 decades, we've all been trained essentially by Google to transform what we're actually looking for into a search query. And that's what Google has done for us. And we now, like whatever we want, we're doing that translation implicitly in our minds, right? Now, that translation is not always perfect. And when you type, boots that has, good grip, that might not be exactly what you're looking for. And what generative AI and large language models have unlocked for us is this ability for humans to now interface with computing and data in a much more natural way. And that's why we recently launched a new product called Bloomreach Clarity that is about conversational commerce, to get the same experience of finding and getting the thing that you want, except in a very natural way that you should communicate with other humans. Now you're able to do that with computing technology and data. And that's where a very exciting place that we're leveraging generative AI to be able to unlock essentially a new way, a new experience to go and search for products and services.
That's great to hear, because I think you sort of are hitting the nail on the head. Google has trained us to think about a lot of these things in an engineering world as async things, right? You do the first search and then you do a second search to refine. There's a lot of onus on you. But when you're doing conversational commerce, they at least remember what was your last question, and then you're able to sort of follow that train of thought, very similar to how we think or humans think. So that's probably a very good thing. Ben, you talk to much more customers than some of us. What are you seeing in your world? Like, what are top few things that you are seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my side, I think a lot of customers are trying to plan out how to get to a point where it makes sense to start utilizing things like LLMs into their daily work, and to actually pull it from their data. Like, a lot of people want to be able to do things like, especially if they're like have small BI teams. They're like, we don't want our BI teams to be bogged down by like these ad hoc requests anymore. How do we get to a point where you can just like ask these questions to our data and have them be answered more and more quickly? So I think I'm having a lot of people who are trying to set up that 1-2 year roadmap that's going to be required for some of them, because some of the companies I'm working with, even if they're larger, are still on-prem, are still trying to figure out, okay, how do I move things to the cloud? So there's a lot of catch up in some spaces, but I think there's a lot of people in different spaces. There are certain companies that have the advantage, whether they were someone who moved early to the cloud, someone who was in the cloud to start with, who have their data maybe a little better integrated, a little more, in the space that's easy to work with. But there's plenty of people who are like, okay, we really gotta, this is a good chance to start asking for budget, to start asking for a bigger initiative, because there's a target that the CEO keeps telling us we want to hit, and we're like, well, we can't even start because we're nowhere close. So we need to really start setting up our ducks in a row if we want to get to what you're saying, this LLM world, this world where we can do everything that was described in the last few minutes. So
yeah, I mean, it's a tailwind that we can use on the other side of the house, like analytics and other stuff, which are operations, which can just help us. Great. I mean, this gets us to our first audience poll that we'd want to do. You probably will start seeing this on your screen at this time. The question that we're trying to ask is, when does your company plan to implement GenAI? Is it now, as Rahul and Zan described? Is it within 6 months, 6 to 18 months, or you don't have any plans? Let's quickly move on to, we talked about, Zan and Rahul gave us this picture of what GenAI can do at TripAdvisor, at various retailers that Bloomreach is working with. What are some of the challenges that we are seeing in your worlds? It's obviously not, Ben touched upon this a little bit, that it's not a straight through path that you can go implement this. What are some of the challenges that you guys are seeing? Maybe Rahul, let's start with you and let's talk about some challenges that you're seeing.
Yeah, this is a great question. And especially when you think about any new transformative technology come along, there's I mean, at least I've observed in my career, there's a lot of expectations of that technology, what it can do, but there's definitely a lot of realities and challenges on the ground. So that's where we are, especially with generative AI, LLMs. I mean, in my mind, if I have to summarize that, I would say the challenges are in 3 big areas. Number one, it's interestingly enough, it's a challenge we've known all along, and this is a availability and access to quality data, right? Do you think about that, like just really the whole aspect of how we do data engineering, data platforms better? That is a big, because again, all these LLMs, either you're doing prompt engineering or fine tuning or building your own model, you need this access to quality data. So that is absolutely a big challenge. Number 2, I would say, is really thinking about velocity and the skills that are needed to drive this revolution, especially with LLMs in particular. It's not only about AI scientists. It's also about ML ops as a function, data engineering, how we're doing pipeline, how we think about all of that. Ben was alluding a little bit earlier around like how we think about even performance and speed, and like how do you get that going. So that's in my mind, it's around skills, and talent is a second challenge. And lastly, this is a constant evolution. It's around what are the right models and algorithms to use. I mean, there's a whole world of choices there today, right? From obviously OpenAI releasing and just to really in the open source communities. And this is where we see every day, like, there's certain models are good from, latency standpoint or cost, or certain models from accuracy standpoint. So all that is a big consideration, or certain task specific models. So to me, that's a big challenge where we are thinking and spending quite a bit of time in understanding that. So in my mind, these are the three buckets of challenges in this space.
Yeah, you covered a wide swath of things. You're absolutely right on that. It's not one thing that's going to help you there. You need sort of a full-blown strategy around all of these things to make that happen. Zan, what are you seeing at Bloomreach?
Yeah, let me just add on to what Rahul had said, which is ultimately we all know that AI is basically powered by data. And that's why data engineering is just so important to especially this new generation of generative AI that we're in right now. Now, part of the challenge, as already mentioned, is accessibility and availability. Now, to add on top of that, we understand that there's going to be a much larger volume of data that we're putting into training these models. And the heterogeneity of data that is coming in is also spread out from all over the place. And then when you think about needing to do that and putting it into production in a way that is highly automated, that can update on a regular basis without human intervention, those are all the challenges now that we face with increased usage, increased heterogeneity, increased volume, and being able to do this in an automated way without spending a ton of resources and manual effort to bring this data in. Those are broadly the challenges that we face within Bloomreach as well. Now, we talked a little bit, and Rahul mentioned a lot about training and refining of models. That's definitely one area. Another pattern and methodology that we've seen is in using generative AI is pairing with retrieval augmentation, right? We know now that generative AI by itself is maybe not good enough to solve all of these problems. For example, hallucinations, for example, being able to get real-time stock data. If you train a model that took weeks or months to train or even to refine, you might not get the latest information like new products or new data that got released. Those have to be augmented essentially by querying another data source, usually also powered by another type of generative AI with encoders, embeddings, and vector databases, right? So what we do at Bloomreach is we have to go and aggregate all of these sources of product data and information on a real-time basis into this retrieval augmentation, and then pair that with large language models. So large language models we can leverage that for the knowledge, the NLP, the conversational capabilities, but also have that retrieval augmentation that can help us ground the truth and give real-time information back to the end user.
Absolutely. I think you sort of hit it on its head when you said you might train in time X, but you might serve at X plus 1 year. I mean, we see this with OpenAI as well. With the earlier version, when the model was trained with data as of 2021, you had some incorrect information coming out there. So you definitely need to keep in touch with newer data and feed that into model without sort of increasing the cost of training to be what it was originally, because you cannot just keep training the original model. So you definitely need some augmentation there. Ben, what are you seeing there in terms of challenges? You sort of touched upon a little bit of that. It'll be good if you sort of relate those challenges with the operational challenges, because you have seen this movie a lot of times where even in analytics, we have the same challenges to get the data to one place.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, like everyone's already kind of covered some of this, but and it's interesting as you're bringing up like augmentation of data. It just makes me think of like in terms of like usually when we think of data in like batch data, right? Like usually it's always like, oh, now we're just basing our assertions based off the prior data. So it always just feels like we're dealing with the same thing where we're constantly trying to make sure our data is up to date. But yeah, I mean, like in terms of like operations, I think it all comes down to, again, just getting data into a place where everyone can use it, one, and two, they can rely on it and believe it and trust it. I think that's going to be the bane of maybe data existence for the next decade where, I mean, maybe I'm speaking too far out there, but it feels like the same problem I was dealing with when I first started my career, which isn't that long, but it's long enough. And I'm sure everyone here where it's like, yeah, how do we get everything into the one place? And then on top of that, how do we trust everything that we're working on? You know, whether it's because people create that data and then they create problems in that data, right? Like they inaccurately, you know, type in something and it doesn't match anymore, and you have to manually deal with that. Or actually, yesterday I was talking to a client who they were bringing up the fact that they have to take essentially addresses and then go look them up on Google to kind of tell what certain buildings are actually. They're like, okay, what kind of business is this? So they actually are like currently manually doing this. So it's like, how far, you know, can we get that to add that quality, that enrichment post? So there's still all these little things that people are doing that I think are hard to kind of encapsulate and then put into, you know, your data, so you can actually build on top of it with these LLMs and things that people are trying to add in.
Yeah, we're going to double click on that in our next section. But let me quickly sort of flash the survey results, and it's very interesting. We have a 38% who are sort of like, let's go do it now, and then we have a completely opposite Kane, 31%, which doesn't know.
Yeah.
So this is very, very interesting, and sort of summarizes, Ben, what you were talking about earlier, that there are still challenges to run the business, and AI sort of seems like in the pyramid, it seems to be too high to be able to do that now. But great. So let's sort of double click specifically on data engineering challenges per se. One of the things that I have seen, and this was the reason that we started Nexla in the first place, is my data engineers was already taxed beyond the capacity. Our backlog was infinite to serve our current business. And every quarter in our quarterly plannings, we were like, hey, I have 50 items that I'm going to push out because I don't have enough engineers to do work to work on this stuff. Now we had data engineers who were already doing operations, analytics, AI, ML models, and now there's this new shiny toy that's out there. How are your teams managing that, Zan? How are your teams managing that?
Well, you know, as you all know, we are a customer of Nexla, so a lot of our ability to get data, product data, especially from our customers, is today powered by Nexla. And before we had Nexla, it was just a nightmare to deal with, because the ability to go and bring in that real-time product data is what powers our retrieval augmentation for all of our use cases, right? So in order for that data to be accurate, to run, for the pipelines to be able to run automatically without a lot of intervention at a large scale, we serve, say, 25% of the e-commerce business in the United States right now. So we just have a ton of heterogeneous data coming from all different directions, a lot of ETL happening to be able to feed our retrieval augmentation system. And this requires us to put in a very highly scalable, but also heavily customizable data pipeline platform, which is why we chose Nexla to do a large part of that, right? So that's one area where we're meeting the challenge specifically to go and solve for these use cases. Another area, as Rahul mentioned earlier, is in terms of model training and model refinement. Now, on this front, we're still pretty early at Bloomreach on doing this type of work. So we've rolled our own manual work for now. So we use a lot of PySpark, we use a lot of PyTorch, we use Kubeflow, but all of those are fairly engineering intensive tools. You know, you have to get someone to go and write the code in PyTorch to go and do the transformations, and Kubeflow, even though it does a lot of the automation, you can't actually customize it that much, you know. So using, and I see us eventually going towards a more robust platform that can replace this work as well, especially as we get more and more models into production, where we're not just training it on, let's say, a monthly basis, but we're looking at now training on a daily basis. You know, if you want to train models on a daily basis and you have a bunch of models, then you're looking at really moving from this manual effort of writing code to adopting a well and good, robust, and high scalable data engineering platform. That's what we're seeing right now.
Great. Rahul, in your world, what are you seeing in your world at TripAdvisor? Similar challenges, something more different?
No, I think similar. Maybe I would just elaborate on two aspects of that. One is it's just in data engineering, and again, Zen covered it. But I think I would say this brings into focus a lot of the challenges that have always been there. I mean, especially companies with large amounts of data. This is the same story. I think even Ben alluded to this earlier. Like, hey, it's the same scenario. I mean, probably he's seen it. I've seen it. We've all seen it, right? Where data is not all in one place, fully rationalized with a good availabilities and SLAs on top of that, with a taxonomy, data dictionary on top of that. Like all that is where I see it's still a lot of work to be done. So we are looking into that space. We are continually working on that when it comes to data automation, zero ETL type of processes, where like we do work internally with multiple business units, but also data we kind of federate and work and feed multiple systems from an activation and targeting, personalization standpoint. So how do we minimize that? So again, a lot of automation, a lot of data quality management is where we are quite focused today. And then other part of this challenge is where we are evolving our thinking around building some solutioning today around ML ops platform, machine learning operations. I mean, that has become a bigger need, especially with even few use cases that we have live right now. And this has a few different aspects to it. Like, how do you think about any models you're leveraging off the shelf, with say, or any licensed models beyond, even beyond prompt engineering or fine tuning? How do you think about cost and latency? That becomes it is an active investment, active monitoring in that. How do you think about packaging these models and integrating into production pipelines? That's not quite straightforward. We have to thinking about that. And lastly, with MLOps platform, thinking about LLM quality, right? Quality of output, hallucinations, that just becomes an ongoing endeavor where we have to think about what does that mean? How do we keep tabs on it and improve that? So the way I would package all that is in this world of ML ops. What do we do? How do we get better there? But that's again a constant work at this point.
Yeah, I think if you think about in software engineering, we started ops with like DevOps, we had data ops. Now we're sort of going to ML ops, but essentially just making sure the systems continuously run and they are doing what they're supposed to do is itself sort of a discipline that all of us need to take care of.
Absolutely, yeah.
Ben, I'm going to sort of just get into the anatomy of a GenAI LLM type of application, and then you think about it. There are two broad things that happen there, right? You train your model, you get data from all of these places, you chunk it, put it in a vector database. Then you have a retrieval augmentation or a vector search combination that you are trying to get your questions answered. Isn't this sort of very similar to, if you remember 10 years back or 15 years back, we were thinking about, let's get all the data to the data lake. Data lake is going to solve all our problems. Or let's get data to a data warehouse. We'll figure out a way to ask questions of our data and it will solve our problems. Do you see similarities in both of these things?
I mean, yeah, I think we're always trying to solve the same problem, right? At the end of the day, right? Like we want to be able to, right? When you think about end goal of data warehouse, we want to have data that's integrated so we can ask questions, right? Like whenever someone tries to sell you the idea of data warehouse or something like that, it's like we want to be able to ask questions that span marketing, operations, like, that can bring in all of this information and put it, together. And so I think that's always the goal, right? And now, we're starting to get to a point where maybe that's becoming more realistic, or at least we can start answering more of the why. Because I think, we're getting to this point where not only can we maybe have data in terms of like, okay, we know the numbers, we know the actual like final output, which is a very derivative generally of what actually occurred, whatever event we're looking at, sales, etc. And now we're getting to a point where it's like, hey, we're seeing sales, dip this one month and go up another month. We can probably start even getting to a point where, hey, we have that basic dashboard. Now we can go a layer deeper and be like, let's ask a question of why. And if you have an LLM that can maybe see your business, maybe see a little bit about what else is going on in the world, it can possibly even dig into that and give you context in terms of maybe what you're seeing and why you're seeing. Maybe it can tell you what SKU was selling really well one month, or what, if you tried a new feature one month, what feature did really well and with what group, and it can start insinuating a lot more of those things because it has access to more of that information. We're always trying to solve that same problem, right? Like we really want to answer that why.
Yeah.
I think Joe Reese put this once recently where it's like, this is a good chance for us to do that because, again, we have a chance to improve data quality. We have a chance to,
Sure.
create data infrastructure that underlying all of those LLMs can actually be accurate enough to where we can support it, right? So I do think we're kind of getting to this point where it's like, this is a chance. Like you brought up Lakehouse or lake data lakes earlier. For this question. And I think what's interesting there is like when we first started data lakes, whatever, 2012, somewhere back there, like the initial versions were often very, I'd say crude, and like we didn't have the best file setups. People didn't always set up, good partitioning in terms of like how the folders were broken down. And I think we have gotten a lot of best practices since then. So I think a lot of the data lakes I'm seeing now are the data lakes that people were discussing back, in 2012. They are possible to work off of. So we are in a point where it's like there is a possibility of having this layer of data that is maybe a little less structured, but still structured enough that like if you were to put something on top of it that has some idea of your business and an idea of data, it can start making some decent inferences off of that.
Absolutely. I think the couple of other questions on the challenges part of it in the Q&A, and this probably, Rahul, you touched upon this a little bit around how do you guys create confidence in data? Krishna is asking this question, like how do you create confidence in this data that's presented? And because you'll always have business teams telling you that this data is not correct. So how do you guys do that today?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because this question has been around for like a while. Like we're gonna touch on all of us touch at different points in time. And I mean, I would say what's happening now is that question is coming up a lot more, right? With GenAI and LLMs. I mean, this is like you can think of another technology or sets of applications that will consume more data, which is a fantastic thing. If you are in the world of data, if you're a data engineer, it's good and bad. You're like on one hand, you're like fantastic. There's a lot of need, a lot of consumption of data, but on the other hand, like how do you do this at scale, and how do you build trust in that data? So how do you build trust in the data? It's in my mind, it's very similar to what we have been thinking. Like number one is, it's so interesting that I just had a meeting today morning with my team. We have this concept, again, nothing groundbreaking, but golden data sets. Right, and this is it's not by any means a new concept. It's been around since I've been in the data field, which is a long time. What you do is how do you define something as a good quality, which is like, is this well defined at the top, right? What data you put in, what metrics, with business logic, definition around that. Do you have a good source, a good quality measure around accuracy, delivery, consistency, availability? You have SLAs around that. Do you have good documentation of those data and fields? Like, do you have taxonomy, some kind of data catalog on top of that? And then do you have a mechanism to govern ongoing quality of that data, right? So it's a combination of that is a good data quality framework in my mind. And so how do you build trust? It comes down to having this framework and implementing this well at a particular company. So to me, those are the basics. I mean, those basics don't change. That's where I'm noticing not every company focuses enough on those basics or fundamentals, but just really doing those things is what can build trust.
Great. I think, Ben, do you want to add anything on the data quality aspect?
I mean, I think if you mean like building trust, I'm happy to add there. I don't know if you mean more data quality in general. I think, one, I think it's, again, Joe Reese put this recently. Well, I don't know if this was a public conversation, but he referenced like most data teams having a level of a punch card, so to speak, where it's like you can only have so many mistakes before either your team is let go or, people just don't trust you anyways. And so you might as well not be working. So, I do think there's something important about treating every piece of like dashboard or anything you deliver as a product like software, not looking for numbers, but really just trying to deliver quality numbers. Because, if you believe that whatever you're building is important in terms of like a dashboard or something like that, you need to make sure that those numbers are reliable so that people treat it that way as well. Otherwise, they'll just be like, those numbers are normally wrong. We're not going to look at that dashboard anyway. So like there is something to be said, like where people will just stop using things if they don't trust them. I don't know if that's where you wanted to go with that question, but
no, this is great. We sort of talked a lot about challenges per se, right? We have big data engineering challenges across. There is heterogeneous data. The data is unstructured. There is consumption mismatch on how the data needs to be consumed. Then we have operations challenges that Rahul alluded to. How do we code, test, deploy? How do we know that these things are doing the right thing? One of the ideas, and this is sort of the second part of the conversation we wanted to do, can we really use generative AI to help us solve data engineering challenges? If generative AI can help us ask the questions from the data, can we really use generative AI to solve data engineering challenges? Maybe generating code or building copilots and stuff like that. What do you guys think about that? Ben, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways. Obviously, like I use it for my day-to-day, whether it be Copilot, whether it be something similar. A lot of pipelines that many people develop these days are already kind of in a situation where they're heavily templatized. So there's probably ways you can often automate it. If you work at a lot of companies like say Facebook or Google, often a lot of your code to a degree is like somewhat auto-generated, right? Like you just have to give it certain parameters and likely it's generating itself to a degree. You're adding some nuance in there. But, I think that was always something that, might have been very different at a large organization in particular, where, I remember someone saying when they worked at Capital One, it would take them like a month or two to do something that would take us a week at Facebook. And it's not, it just has to do with the infrastructure we had set up around it. So, there's companies that have already been kind of implementing similar things, either automating or templatizing or building things in such a way that like, instead of taking, again, months to build a pipeline and push it out, it takes, a day or less. I think on top of that, some of the other things that are probably more important, and again, too many conversations with Joe Reese clearly, but we were talking about data modeling and how, a lot of companies, maybe they don't do it or they don't have the time or they feel rushed. And so it might not be a bad place to like start trying to see if that can work, because like, well, at least, if people don't feel like they have the time, if data teams aren't given the time to correctly data model or set up their data in a way that can be fed into future states, if we can have some sort of LLM or model that can tell us how to do it, and then we just follow it, then we're not stuck with that excuse anymore. And at least we're now following better practices versus just kind of going forward and not thinking through things. So there's a lot of ways that I can see them being used, and I'm again already using pretty heavily. So,
Zan, are you guys adopting some of this and moving towards being more agile and nimble?
Yeah, certainly. We are, I would say, one of the first early adopters of leveraging generative AI in terms of assisting our developers to do coding. Now, a lot of the concerns with the early adoption around that has been with respect to protecting our IP. So we had to structure a special agreement with OpenAI to keep our IP safe and put us on a separate instance. But we did that very early on and very much encouraged our developers to make use of this in their everyday life at the company. And I personally also use this quite a lot to not only do summarizations, report generations, and a bunch of other sort of management level things that generative AI is now helping me out with. So it's been an incredible, I would say, gain in efficiency that has been added to our overall organization. But just in terms of data quality and data engineering in general, though, I do think that one of the reasons we adopted Nexla was because of this capability to be able to automatically figure out how to map to existing APIs. And that's an area where I think generative AI is going to just improve that dramatically, to increase the time to value in creating ETL pipelines, understanding an API that you've never seen before, but now generative AI will just be able to figure that out. So being able to make that more efficient, setting up pipelines, And then on the other side, we talked about data quality. That's another area where we can gain a lot of efficiency. We run today a whole bunch of relevancy reports and testing for every single release. If we change our algorithms, if we change our ranking and semantic search capabilities, at the end of the day, we let our human validators do relevancy reports, and they will tell us, well, your changes have made things less relevant or no relevant. But now you can go and replace that with basically decoder LLMs. They can go now and figure out and tell you how relevant it is or isn't anymore. So you can start doing a lot of these data quality aspects also by leveraging generative AI. So a lot of efficiency to be gained in many areas.
Absolutely. You talked about one thing, and we have a similar question there, which is about data leak prevention. You talked about you struck an agreement with OpenAI to put you on a separate instance. Do you think that the current techniques that we have to prevent data leaks, are they sufficient, or do we need a whole new branch of application security, data security to evolve in order to do things that people are trying to do with GenAI? One thing that I know is Stack Overflow is pretty much sort of, I know the amount of traffic that was going to Stack Overflow earlier has reduced substantially because people are asking those questions straight up on ChatGPT.
Yeah, no, I absolutely think that there's much more technology frameworks and new companies that will spring up around generative AI that will help us protect our data and IP better, and also protect licensing better. I think that's a big concern in the community that is not just related to artwork and songs or music, but code and IP there as well, right? So yeah, I think when we go forward here, there's going to be many new developments and frameworks will help us protect us even more.
Absolutely. Rahul, how are you seeing this thing evolve?
I'll just maybe start with that earlier point on DLP, because that's a big topic of discussion for us as well. As we think about data leak prevention, and again, TripAdvisor being a heavy content company, this is where it's front and center for us. And we do think about how do we prevent this, or try to think about this from the outset when it comes to protecting our content with better licensing, better copyrights. There's a lot of discussions in that space, potentially even blocking AI crawlers from accessing the content, which is on the other end of the preventing data leak. But then also where we are thinking is what are the techniques that can be enhanced, or methodologies that can be leveraged to do more. I would say this. The answer to the question is, are current techniques enough for data leak prevention? The answer should be no, or never enough. To ask the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, that's what they'll say, because the threat patterns do emerge and do evolve quite rapidly. So we have to evolve to do so as well. In terms of what we are doing or how generative AI can be leveraged to get better in the world of data engineering, I know we touched on the copilot aspects, really driving efficiency with writing code, not just code, test cases, the whole cycle of code deployment. One other aspect of that is what we are seeing is in terms of data observability, right? One challenge which has historically been how do you understand data drifts, and any leakage or breakage in terms of quality. There's, as you all know, or this group knows, where that process can be manual, can be triaging with multiple tools, your logs, lineage, like a lot of things you look at and have that to really understand where is the breakage in data patterns, and especially with the larger data sets becomes quite a bigger challenge. So that's one very specific area I do see where LLMs can be quite effective. So just wanted to put that out there. Data observability, data monitoring is where I do anticipate substantial impact, positive impact with LLMs.
You actually kind of answered. We have a question in the panel about what are the recent examples where you have used an LLM for data engineering. Is there anything else that you'd want to add where you have actually used an LLM for data engineering? Zan, Ben, Rahul? One thing where I'm seeing...
Oh, good.
Sorry. One place where I'm definitely seeing people using this is if you can have a LLM crawl through your SQL databases, through your different data models that you have in place, then you can potentially have a SQL query generation for somebody who doesn't really know SQL. So you can potentially have an LLM which can generate a SQL query for you, and that's a use case that I'm seeing people are trying more and more of. And I'm not sure what you guys are seeing, but that definitely is one thing where I'm seeing people do use LLMs to do what a typical data engineer would do. I have gone in and asked ChatGPT to write a code for me, which will strip off certain set of characters. It's very good at doing that kind of stuff. So I've seen some of those. But Ben, what are you seeing?
Oh no, I was just gonna, give your standard examples. Everything from asking it to build a pipeline, whether it be an Airflow or something else, or have it maybe pull data. I think this was brought up earlier, like just pulling it from an API that maybe you don't have as much information about or haven't worked with before, just to at least set up the framework, right? It often gets you just enough of the way there that you're not having to write the same thing you've written 30 times over and over again. And I think that's kind of the ways that I've used it. It's like, I've already written this before, I don't want to write it again kind of feelings. That always gives me a little bit of a pause, only because I think in my brain literally been like, I just don't want to think about this, and thus I will use someone else to think about it. So I'm often like, what is the larger impact of that on, maybe myself, but also maybe people who haven't gone through the process of doing it. Like, is it good to not think about it? Is it unnecessary to think about it? Or is it something that you should think about, because if you don't understand this, you won't understand how to go beyond that. So I think I do always take a quick pause. I'm like, I wonder what the larger impact is by me not wanting to think about this, and what that costs.
Let me add to that, and that is that one of the key capabilities of Bloomreach's product is to enable what we call the data-driven creator. And what that has meant for us in the past is that we essentially give tools to the folks that are not necessarily data engineers, but they need data to be able to do their jobs effectively. Now, in the past, our tool has played the translator of that data, if you will, right? So you don't have to know any SQL language or any other query language to be able to surface the data, but you'll be limited by the capabilities of our platform to generate insights. We might have a bunch of filters in the UI, and then you can generate this chart or that chart. But now with generative AI, that's really democratized this ability to get analysis out of the data. Yeah. Now we can just use generative AI directly in our product, transform it into a query language, and give that directly back to the data-driven creators. So we're seeing now, unlocked by generative AI, a shift between jobs that traditionally could only be done by data engineers, now to be done by folks that doesn't necessarily have a data engineering degree. And that's what we call the data-driven creators. And the combination of platforms as well as LLM technologies has actually been able to enable that.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And there is a plethora of your democratization is probably the right word there, that you just have way more number of use cases possible because we now have that tech. It's about time we do one other poll about, we heard a bunch of things here about generative AI, about prompt engineering, RAGs, LLMs. The question is, what GenAI use cases are you excited about? While you guys are putting in your responses, Ben, there is a lot of people come to you for advice. We also have a lot of data engineers in audience today, and a lot of them are probably thinking about how will their careers evolve with code generation copilots. What advice would you give to those data engineers? How do they stay ahead of the curve? What should they focus on? What should they not focus on?
Yeah, I think to be in tech is to constantly be forced to learn new things. When I started in the data world, I think Hadoop was hitting its peak, and so I was quickly trying to learn everything about that, and it's not completely useless. I don't think it's fair to say it's completely useless information, but at least the depth of it that I probably understand is no longer as important as it once was. So I think the things that I still use today are a lot of the basics. So I think that's something that I will always tell anyone is like, spend time learning how to, learning how to write SQL, learning how to program, even things as basic as data structures and algorithms, I think give you a lot of understanding in terms of like how things work. Really build your fundamentals, because as you go on, you'll realize everything's just built on that, and we're dealing with the same problems we're always dealing with. So if you have a strong foundation, regardless of if you're, using, I'm trying to think, like when I started, I want to say I was using like what was it? It was like Cafe Tensor, like, which was another version of like a TensorFlow, but a configuration version. You're learning all these different things, even if they become less important. If you have the basics, you can always rebuild off of that, because the things on top, the higher level things that we're working on, will often change, but the actual underlying work that we're doing, I don't think changes as much. So understanding, again, the basics, understanding the basics of why we're doing things, like why are we bringing all this data into a data warehouse or a data lake, like all that basic understanding, I don't think goes away. I do think, yeah, there'll be some changes, but if you're technical, there will always be a need for someone technical. I don't know what it will look like in the future. It'll probably be different. Yeah, maybe it'll be something with vector databases, or maybe it'll be, something around LLM ops, but generally there's still this need for understanding how to build solid systems, build systems that are, can be repeated. I think that's why earlier when you reference like adding in data, so you augment that data over and over again, it's like that's the same thing we've been doing for a long time, and it's now just being used at a different approach. Like those are still systems we're constantly repeating. So knowing how to build systems that are reliable, knowing your basics, I think is what you'll always constantly need.
Rahul, in the same vein, we have two similar questions. You manage a big data engineering team. What data engineering skills do you think data engineers today should build that even a LLM or AI cannot replace?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I would answer it this way.
And I'll weave another one, and you probably can contrast the difference. The other question that's out there is, what skills do you think, or what do you think Gen AI would substitute in the data lifecycle? So that's one part of it. And the other part of it is, what do you think is going to be irreplaceable?
Yeah, no, that's a good contrast. Both or two ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
What I would say is, again, here's as a grounding statement, or as a principle, I would say that it's not about like Gen AI or LLMs or technology that is completely disrupt and change things we do. It's just if we aren't adopting and taking this change into our stride and really evolving ourselves, that becomes a bigger problem, not the technology in itself. Like, how do we change and adapt with that newer capabilities, and how we like really transform with that. That's important. So with that said, I would say what skills will be either substitute. I mean, the fundamentals don't change, right? It's really like I mean, if you are in data engineering space, what I tell my team, or at least part of my team, which is data engineering focus, is around like how you think about really a solid technical skills. Those would not change, right? Your background, your training, your understanding of the data space, how you write code, the fundamentals don't change from your technical background. Your core skills that are needed from really intellectual curiosity, communication, collaboration, those human, like really soft skills don't change. There's not that. What can and may change is how you can be more productive, how or where a particular system, particular feature or tooling can automate some of the tasks that have been quite repetitive. So to me, that's where the initial thrust of the Gen AI LLM applications would be, like how to make an existing team member, existing data engineer much more productive, much more efficient. And in this process, if there's certain tasks that are really taken over by like an LLM, that so be it. There's always going to be a lot of challenges and opportunities in the space of data engineering. And just the fact that like here we again different, like we all of us touched on this. We are still talking about data quality and data foundation. Here we are, like how many years of data revolution, and still that problem is not a solved problem. To me, that points to the fact that even we do automate and do get better with LLMs, there's a big challenge ahead of us, which is where adopting the new technology, changing, evolving it, and really focusing on the higher order problems becomes important.
Absolutely. We have time for one last question. I know Zan answered a question on the chat already, so we are going to skip that. The question that we have, and Zan, maybe you can take this one, is that there are some ML teams that do not specify data engineering roles, and it ends up being a problem for software engineers and analysts to go figure out. Why do you think this happens, and how do you think this will change with generative AI?
I'm sorry, I actually don't understand what this question means.
I think there's a premise in there, which is like the organization doesn't have enough data engineers to solve the problem. So we have software engineers who are trying to do data engineering. In my mind, it's again a similar skill set. You are a software engineer before you became a data engineer, or the other way around. So how do you think this will change with adoption of GenAI? Would we need fewer engineers to solve the same problems? Will we need more engineers to solve the problems, or how will this change?
Well, I think that generative AI will help make engineering a lot more efficient across the board. So over time, we'll always need less of, I would say, folks that do more amount of work. It is just higher amount of productivity, right? Now, do I think that that is more weighed towards data engineering versus ML versus developing front end? It's hard to call that right now. I would say that all of these three different roles will have the benefit of productivity improvement, right? I would say that it sounds like the challenge here is that maybe in some organizations, we don't clearly define a specialization that is focused on data engineering. And I think that is true. That's also somewhat true in my organization as well. We may not make the distinction between a specialization between data engineering and software engineers, but in reality, you're just doing data engineering work. So I have other people who I think are doing that, right? Now, on that level, I don't know if it's such a big deal. I mean, we consider everybody in our engineering team software engineers. You may have a specialization in data engineering. You may have a specialization in building models. You can have a specialization in developing front end. Engineering discipline principles are basic principles that apply to all of those things. And you can specialize in each one of those things. That's totally okay. That's how I personally treat how we handle things.
Absolutely. I think on that note, we're completely out of time. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today as we discussed opportunities, limitations of GenAI in our discipline. If you didn't have time, I know we have few unanswered questions. We'll follow up separately. All of you should receive an email with an event recording along with additional resources, including an upcoming workshop demonstrating how to fine-tune an LLM using your own private data. Have a great afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Everyone, take care.
Thank you. Bye.